Thank you, Vittorio. I will try to be very short if I can. My presentation is mainly theoretical, and my aim is to present a conceptual framework to manage cultural differences, which is one of the fundamental topic we are dealing with, by going beyond the doctrine, the political doctrine of multiculturalism. That's why the title is In Which Way Interculturality Can Achieve Social Integration. Now, I will go through these steps. First of all, an analysis of what is multiculturalism as a political doctrine, its shortcomings and failures. Then I will put down the problem, the issue of what does it mean to recognize a cultural identity, the problem of recognition, how we can recognize another cultural identity. So which semantics of recognition we should have. And I ask myself, is interculturalism an alternative to multiculturalism? So after having analyzed what is interculturalism today, I end up by saying that an effective interculturality needs a new semantics of difference, diversity, and what I call a relational reason. So next would be, what is the relational reason and how does it work? So which way to go in the end? Now, the basic issue we have to deal with is the issue of identity. I distinguish between personal identity, social identity, and cultural identity. They are three different notions. Personal identity is an answer to the question, who am I for myself? Who I wish to be? The social identity is a response to the question, who am I for the significant others? What I want to be for them in relation to them. Of course, the I can be a person, a social group, a nation, whatever. Now, the cultural identity has to do with the issue of what we call the multiple self. The issue, in fact, of multiculturalism is an image of the multiple self understood as the self asking himself or herself how to relate to different social cultural identities, since it is embedded into very many different social networks and must keep them together. So, given this issue of identity, personal, social, and cultural, what is multiculturalism? We all know what it is, but I recall the fact that it is a term spread in the West during the 60s to indicate at the beginning the respect, tolerance, and defense of cultural minorities, that is, different identities belonging to particular social groups. As we know, there are many countries adopting multicultural doctrine, varieties of experiences in Canada, US, Australia, UK, Netherlands, etc., etc. But as a practical experience and a political doctrine, multiculturalism has gone through great changes, indeed, since then. Now we have to distinguish between multiculturalism as a social fact, which means the co-presence of different cultures, as a matter of fact, from multiculturalism as an ideology, or what I call the political doctrine of multiculturalism. which means the respect and tolerance of particular identities which claim to be bearers of universal values. So the dialectic between particular and universal. And also from the idea that multiculturalism is a social imaginary. As a social imaginary, it means all different, all equal, which is a very complex and paradoxical slogan, if you want. Now, on the issue of cultural identity, the political doctrine of multiculturalism has to deal with very fundamental questions. The first one is, how does PDM define a cultural difference? And the answer is, let the different identities be equal. Since any distinction is a discrimination for multiculturalism, cultural differences must be treated as indifferent, which means that they should make no difference. They should not make any difference. And the other question is about the borders between different cultural identities. And the answer in this case is that the borders cannot be crossed, but only accommodated to each other in a public sphere, which is a competitive Hobbesian arena. Now, the main empirical outcomes of multiculturalism as a PDM, as a political doctrine, I will not repeat that, is that after being adopted as official policy in many countries, multiculturalism has generated more negative than positive effects, such as, first of all, the fragmentation of society into segments. Second, the segregation of cultural minorities. And third, the enforcement of cultural relativism. This is not the theoretical statement only, it is based upon many empirical researches which are quoted in my written paper. So two basic reasons for the shortcomings of multiculturalism. First of all, cultural determinism, and second, the neutralization of ethics. First, it assumes that every knowledge is completely conditioned by the cultural context, and it is valid only referring to it, which means a form of cultural determinism. Second, it denies the possibility of giving a moral judgment on cultural patterns, which means the neutralization of ethics. These are two issues for multiculturalism which bring to the three intrinsic limits of PDM: epistemological, moral, and political. From the epistemological point of view, this doctrine promises the recognition of identities, but its epistemological relativism cannot provide such performance. The authentic recognition of an identity needs an assumption on the truth of such identity. If you don't have any idea of the truth, then you cannot solve the problem of the recognition of an identity. Second, the moral limit. According to PDM, what is culturally determined becomes licit. To put ethical limits will violate its basic principle of ethical relativism. And third, the political limit. As a political ideology, PDM promises tolerance, but as many researchers and many reports say, in fact, it generates intolerance. So what are the root deficits? What is the root deficit of multiculturalism? Basically, it's the loss of the relationality between the different cultures. Multiculturalism as a political doctrine has nothing to say about the what lies in between cultures, their relations. In other words, it is an immunization against the social relationships between people belonging to different cultures. In short, PDM is a reductionist doctrine of recognition. That is why we have to think about what is recognition and what brings about recognition. The issue of recognition, of course, is about the encounter dialogue between different cultures, which depends on the kind and degree of recognition they offer each other. But what does it mean to recognize the identity of an alter? Now, Paul Ricoeur, as far as I know, has more than others clarified what can be the semantics of recognition. And to him, recognition has three main meanings, three categories of meanings. The first one is identification, which means drawing a cognitive distinction. But second, the cognitive distinction should be validated. So recognition as validation. What is distinguished is evaluated as true. It is like that, okay? And third, recognition as gratitude, thankfulness to what is recognized. So these are three basic meanings of recognition, but to my mind, they are not enough. Why? Because according to Ricoeur, these are only mental activities done by an individual observer. There is no social relationality. Recognition to him is a mental activity of the individual in order to say, well, you are, for instance, a Japanese. Yes, you are a true Japanese, not only one who speaks Japanese. And I'm grateful to you for your presence, for being here, for your existence, okay? And that's fundamental, of course. It's absolutely necessary, but it's not enough. Because recognition is more than an individual mental activity. The acts of recognition, be they individual or collective, are actions which can exist only in a circuit of gifts. There should be a relationality there, a circuit of gifts. They need a proper cultural and social context in order to be performed, albeit the social context does not determine, of course, everything. It's not a deterministic process. So the process of recognition, the process of arriving at the relational recognition is an activity of reason and reflexivity. But reason should be relational and reflexivity should also be relational, which means that the process of recognition is an action that can be performed only by a reflexive reason, a reason which reflects or is reflexive upon social relations, which I call relational reason because it's practiced both in oneself and on social relationships, of course, in different ways. Now, we need to expand the concept of recognition beyond Ricoeur's semantics. The acts of identification, validation, and gratitude require and should be interpreted in the light of a fourth semantics, which is recognition as a social relation, which means recognition is at the same time a reference, a bond, and an emergent effect within a circuit of gifts. This is the relational semantics of recognition. If we don't have a relational view of what recognition is and implies, we cannot really understand recognition only as a mental individual activity. Okay? So the question is, can what we call today present interculturality be an answer to the failures of multiculturalism? Yes and no, in the sense that yes, because interculturality is very interested in the what lies in between cultures, okay? So it's, or should be, relational in principle. So it can be an answer, provided that it can use a proper semantics of recognition as a social relation, which means to forge the inter as an active public sphere of inclusion based on taking care of the relational goods. Does it? Now, my answer is that so far, yes and no. What we call today interculturality, or the theory of interculturality, has the advantage to stress the inter, namely what lies in between different cultures, but it does not possess, yet at least, the conceptual and effective means to understand and handle the problems of the inter, the public sphere, when the different cultures express cultural values radically conflictual between them. So the trouble of present interculturality result from two lacks. First, an insufficient reflexivity inside the single cultures, and the lack of a relational interface between the different cultures, that is, between the carrier subjects. To get an adequate intercultural solution, we need to resort to a new semantic of difference diversity that is not binary or merely contractual. A semantics of reflexivity able to build up a common relational world, that is the inter. By considering that the kind of reflexivity people use in building up their cultural identities through social interactions is correlated first to the way they operate distinctions, and therefore to the semantics of difference at their disposal, and second, to the choice they make between these semantics. Now, unfortunately, modern and postmodern cultures provide only two semantics of difference, what I call the contractual or dialogical, if you want, semantics, and the binary semantics. The contractual or dialectical or dialogical conceives of cultural difference as a border between strangers who shall try to find out an accommodation, a negotiation between them. The binary semantics conceives of cultural difference as a functional mechanism of division for handling the system-environment relation, the I/other relation. So the shortcomings of the modern and postmodern semantics of difference are the following. Both of them have deep lacks in managing the encountered dialogue between individuals or cultures due to the fact that the process of recognition that they envision does not meet the requirements of recognition as a social relation of mutual identification, validation, and gratitude between different cultural identities. So we need to overcome the modern and postmodern semantics of cultural differences. A third semantic should be introduced, which is called relational semantics. It conceives of distinction as a social relation. So neither as a mere discourse or dialectic or contract, nor as a functional mechanism. Sorry, I cannot go on. Let's go. Okay. So we have to deal with three different semantics, the contractual, the binary, and the relational semantics, as different ways to deal with the difference, the cultural difference, and the distinction between different cultures. So the contractual semantics says that the difference is a gap, a border between ego and alter, in which there is at the same time a clash and a sharing between them. The binary semantics says that the difference is an operation of self-reference, autopoiesis, according to Luhmann, and incommunicability between ego and alter. There is no possibility of translation of one culture into another. The third one, the relational semantics, says that the difference, the cultural difference, is a dissimilar way to live a shared relation which is constitutive both of ego and alter. If you want a diagram, just have a look at the lower row. The first contractual or dialect is the Habermas view of what is a difference. A difference is a gap, a border between ego and alter, in which there is at the same time clash and sharing between. So they remain strangers. They meet each other on the border, and nothing more than the border between them. The binary semantics, according to Luhmann, is autopoietic in the sense that the slash between ego and alter is a real total separation between the two. There is no chance to make agreements or communicate in a meaningful way. The relation, the third semantics, says that the difference is to live a relation which is constitutive of both ego and alter, although they are different, because they share a relationship, but they are different in themselves. So that's the point. So what does it mean to treat cultural differences as social relations? It means to cope with the issue of recognition as full as it can be in terms of a circulation, a circuit of gifts, where reciprocity is not a utilitarian exchange, but a symbolic exchange of goods, because this is real recognition, okay? So the question becomes, treating cultural differences in terms of symbolic exchange, there is a circulation of gifts, is it a rational or irrational behavior? To answer this question, we must introduce the issue of how human reason works in dealing with social relations. What does it mean to have a rational view of social relation, to implement, treat, and manage social relations in a rational way? So what I am saying is that the relational semantics provides a new vision of the human relation, of the human reason, beyond the famous distinction suggested by Max Weber on rationality. As we all know, Max Weber distinguishes between Wertrationalität and Zweckrationalität, the value rationality and the instrumental rationality. This is not enough. This is a misleading distinction to some extent. The question is very complicated, but what I am saying is that if we introduce the relational semantics of difference, we can see these limitations and go further. Because according to Max Weber, the Wert, that is the value, is something ambiguous. It's a value which can be exchanged, which can have a price or not, depending. So we have to go on and think that human reason can and must be understood as a complex of four components. The instrumental one, Zweckrationalität, the goal-oriented, but also the relational dimension, what I would call Beziehungsrationalität, and the value component, not as a value which can be exchanged or which has a price, which can be priced on the market, because the worth can also be priced on the market, but a value as an appreciation of what is dignus, the Würde-Rationalität, that is, the dignity in itself of what we are looking for or recognizing. So this is just a picture of the complex of the human reason when the four components work together. So there is the instrumental rationality on the left side, the goal-oriented rationality as a value in a situated context, the relational rationality, and the axiological rationality in terms of rationality as a gratuitous recognition of what has an inalienable dignity, that is, what is good in itself, okay? So the relational reason is precisely the reason working in this way, recognizing another culture by operating this complex rationality. Relational reason can be defined as a way to manage cultural differences through a relational reflexivity. There is a type of reflexivity exercised on the social relationships as such, insofar as it accomplishes the following operations. The relational reason brings into the scene the reasons of the social relations beyond the internal reasons of the individual persons and beyond the functional reasons of the social system, because we have to coexist, and therefore there is a reason in the coexistence, in existing together, in the relationality of being together. Second, it links together all the components of the reasons intrinsic to the relations, their goals, means, and values, and it makes them work relationally, both within each culture and between different cultures. So in my conclusions, the clash between cultural identities can be avoided not by resorting to a multicultural ideology or social imaginary, all different, all equals, which does not mean anything, which states that cultures are all different, all equals. But it needs many versions, because this kind of multiculturalism can be communitarian, liberal, etc., but by looking at how the reason of their relations works in a manner that is appropriate to their coexistence, existing together. So the final statement is, cultural clashes occur when the relational reason does not work in a proper way. Thank you so much.